Thou toldst me they were stolen unto this wood, and here I am enwoed within this wood because I cannot meet my Hermia. Hence, get thee gone and follow me no more.
You draw me, you hard-hearted Adam.
In Act 2, Scene 1 of William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, there is a particular scene where one of the main characters reaffirms her love for the male lead. The two then begin a long series of back and forths, ultimately ending with her rejection, and that's really interesting. See, if we were to mark the lines which have a clear opposite, we see a very peculiar phenomenon occur in the text. Each of Demetrius's phrases are diametrically opposed by another one of Helena's. Each phrase contrasts the other in so much that it gives a sense that both are fundamentally divided, that both are intrinsically at odds with the other, that Helena, even though she loves Demetrius, is ultimately unable to have her affections returned. The differences between the two characters are magnified by this exchange. Dichotomies are formed. Dichotomies, in essence, are division of two things as being entirely different or fundamentally opposed. In literature, a dichotomy often serves to emphasize clear differences between two literary elements. A Midsummer Night's Dream, for example, juxtaposes the ham-fisted rhetoric of two characters who love and hate the other. And if we were to examine the book even further, we find a surprising amount of dualism present in the narrative. In fact, most of the characters in the story can be broken down into pairs, and we can begin seeing the story in this light. The juxtaposition offers a telling indicator of what Shakespeare is trying to accomplish. As Ismail writes, dichotomies are not just literary devices, but linguistic tools to expose a change in the consciousness of certain characters in Shakespeare. Platt's view further awakens us to a new level of approaching Shakespeare from a psychological point of view. And the same approach has its link with the Jungian notion psyche as a union of opposites, a property inherent in paradoxes and paradoxical structures. While Ismail's analysis centers primarily on the psychological depictions of the characters in the play, his interpretation of this phenomenon nevertheless provides an interesting case study as to the frequency of the contrast present. Though his works did not specifically mention the dichotomy, in fact, he references the paradox to a greater extent. The central concept behind the dichotomy is still there. To create a paradox, one must first have two conflicting sets of ideas. And it is in this conflict that A Midsummer Night's Dream's focal message is effective.
Take, for example, the central setting of the play, Athens and the forest. What separates these two settings apart from any sort of physicality is the way both are portrayed on a meta level. For instance, characters in Athens follow a strict adherence to direct communication. There is little to no rhyme, and what little there is doesn't seem to be indicating at something grander. In contrast, the forest has characters speak almost completely in rhyme, and there is heavy use of highly fantastical metaphors. Athens is portrayed as orderly and rigid, while the forest is portrayed as whimsical and fake. Defamiliarizing the forest emphasizes the setting as being entirely dreamlike, a reference to one of A Midsummer Night's Dream's central motif. Athens, on the other hand, is portrayed as very structured and tangible. Lysander and Hermia choosing to flee from Athens could be interpreted as a desire to escape order, while them choosing to flee the forest could be interpreted as them chasing after a distant dream, a marriage that will never come to be. The dichotomy between constraint and freedom, Athens and forest, serves to not only contextualize the lover's dilemma, but also to provide clear indicators of where the story is headed with their relationship. And it introduces a mystical element that I don't think is really present in the story thus far. The narrative's fixation on dualism, on juxtaposition, is littered throughout this play, and I think that on closer inspection, we find scant tidbits of a world built on contradicting themes.
So where are we getting at with this? The analysis of dichotomies very rarely serves any other purpose but to emphasize already established character traits and narrative themes. And the use of dichotomies in and of itself is very much a normal phenomenon. There is no deviation from the norm. Shakespeare is very much following a clear beat path. So that begs the question, why are we showing you this? Well, if we were to separate or dichotomize the various literary elements not by their surface level meaning, but what they intrinsically represent, we get to see a very interesting picture. Helena, as a symbol of unrequited love, juxtaposes with Hermia's reciprocated love. Demetrius, as a symbol of aggression, as he obstinately pursues Hermia, contrasts with Lysander's passivity, as he chooses to run away to the forest with Hermia. Hippolyta disapproves of Theseus' decision to force Hermia and Demetrius' wedding. Titania and Oberon are at the odds as what they should do with the Indian boy. And if we were to continue with this pattern, we arrive at one character who has no clear opposite, Puck, but more specifically, what Puck represents.
See, Puck is portrayed as a very mischievous sprite that delights in playing tricks on unsuspecting victims. He is chaotic, unpredictable, and forward-moving. Now, some might say that Puck is a symbol of chaos, and that is contrasted by Theseus, who is the symbol of order. But I think that such a statement fails to understand the underlying role of Puck in the grander mesostructure of the story. Yes, Puck is unpredictable, he is chaotic, but ultimately he is under the authority of Titania and Oberon, that despite his seemingly anarchic behavior, he still plays his part in the story. He is that guiding force, the invisible hand, the impetus to which things can occur, from which agents in the story are driven, yet are unaware that they are doing so at the behest of an external force. Puck, as a plot device, as an agent from which others can act, is the driving force of the story, from which things can be explained by the readers, but not necessarily by the characters of the story. And this is really important because of what Puck stands for. Puck, not the character, but the concept, represents fate. And that's really interesting. Puck, as a symbolic personification of destiny or fate, frames the story as one of free will, rather than free love. In fact, if one were to view the story as a struggle between destiny and choice, certain scenes begin to make a lot more sense. For instance, upon hearing of Puck's failures, Oberon chastises Puck for turning someone's false love true, to which Puck responds by saying, "Then fate overrules that. One man holding troth, a million fail, confounding oath on oath." Puck blames fate, and that statement is very telling in that it characterizes Puck as someone who is not only aloof and uncaring, but someone who finds fate the most suitable answer for his mistake. In fact, Puck's depiction as an uncaring, playful trickster offers telling indicators as to what fate is like, a trait which is demonstrated by Puck's consistent interference with the natural order of the world, which goes undetected for the most part, and this seemingly innocuous trait is really important. If we were to look at the various events that follow, we find that the majority of the characters act under the impression that they possess a sort of agency over their lives. Lysander, for example, cites reason as his, reason for falling in love with Helena. And with Puck's consistent interference, the natural order of the world slowly descends into discord. In fact, it takes the literal divine intervention of the gods, Titania and Oberon, to steer the course of fate. It was them, after all, that commanded Puck to reverse what he had done, an act which would have forced Puck back into the four subplots as a sort of deus ex machina. And if we were to view his role in the mesostructure of the play, we can see his influence throughout all four stories. In fact, the way the play was written allowed Puck the capacity to act as both the impetus to which a majority of the events can be framed upon, as well as the solution to what seems to be an unsolvable problem. He was, after all, the first character to have interacted with all four distinct narratives before they had finally converged at the very end. And this is really important in understanding how fate as a theme is reinforced throughout the story. Responding to an assertion made by John Russell Brown, a professor at Birmingham University, Michael Taylor writes, "It is not impossible both to agree and disagree with Russell Brown. The way in which A Midsummer Night's Dream ends does indeed suggest that, despite the difficulties in the ways of the lovers' union, the happiest possible conclusion has been inevitable. This inevitability stands at the core of A Midsummer Night's Dream's central theme, and the play's fixation on this theme is firmly rooted in how it's structured. In narratives especially, two elements to consider when analyzing the contours of narrative themes are fabula and sujet, what the story is and how it's told, and how A Midsummer Night's Dream is told in conjunction with the recurrent themes of fate is very concurrent to what had already been established. The linear storytelling, while a bit of a stretch, forces us to follow the narrative as the author had planned it. Like the characters of the story, the readers lack any agency that one would typically find in chronologically disjointed narratives. Like the characters, the readers are unabashedly unaware of what is happening. And I think another element that is just as easily important is the way the characters are set up. And I think why we, the readers, are able to abstract and conceptualize a lot of the characters so easily is because of the way the characters are built. For example, Demetrius's relative lack of individuation in comparison to Lysander becomes meaningful. A spotted and inconstant man in his initial wooing and later casting off of Helena, Demetrius possesses a stunted personality. Unlike Lysander, he reveals no sense of humor, no capacity for musical courtship, no courtship or wit to overcome an obstacle to marrying his beloved, and no facility for poetic expression in general. In short, what characterizes Demetrius is his affection for Hermia and her rejection of him, not any significant personal trait. I'd even go so far as to say that Lysander suffers from this very same caveat. In fact, most of the characters are incredibly one-dimensional, and I think that characterizing the cast in this manner helps serve two purposes. Firstly, it creates instantly relatable and understandable characters that do not need extra stage time to be developed. Keep in mind that A Midsummer Night's Dream was originally intended as a play, and the choice to truncate complexity in favor of relatability is incredibly effective in keeping the audience invested. Secondly, and most importantly, it foregrounds the central message of the narrative. When the characters are lessened, everything else gets put into the spotlight, and this seemingly strange narrative choice reveals to us a surprising tale about destiny and choice, and how there might be certain things beyond our control.